Chapter 30. Harrison's eyelids twitched. Where did you get $200,000? Your sister-in-law wants to split Hannah's pension equally and transferred it to me, Lauren answered. She could tell that Nash was a very capable person. In any case, she would not give up on this son-in-law. And you can keep this money. It's easy for me to make money. Nash could tell from Harrison's tone that funds were very tight for Baroque. Yet, his future mother-in-law was willing to give him this sum of money. When he went abroad to perform missions, he only used about $42,000 for a month on both food and accommodation while staying in a 5-star hotel. Lauren was really treating him as part of her family, and that warmed Nash's heart. Harrison took the bank card from his wife. Lauren frowned. Just as she was about to deliver the goods, she saw Harrison shoving the card forcefully into Nash's arms. "Since we're giving it to you, just take it. You can go hide for a month. When the old man recovers his memory, we'll definitely welcome you back grandly." Nash put away the bank card helplessly. In the afternoon, Hira accompanied Nash to the outside of the company. She fished out the latest high-end smartphone and handed it to Nash. The phone's protective case was one for couples, and the wallpaper was a photo of them. "This is a gift from me. I also registered a WhatsApp account for you, so you must send me messages every day." Hira glared at Nash and said. Nash nodded and smiled. "I haven't given you a gift yet, but you already beat me to it." Hira smiled and said, "My birthday is on the 22nd, so you can give me a gift then." After saying that, she suddenly hugged Nash. Her voice choking, she said, "Nash, don't you feel like you've been wronged?" Nash treated her grandfather for his condition but was being kicked out of the family by him. If it were her, she would definitely be immensely aggrieved. Nash inhaled the fragrance of Hira's hair and hugged her slowly. "You can blame me for my skills not being good enough, otherwise, there wouldn't be residual effects from his condition. If his master had been the one to do it, he would definitely be able to repair the old man's brain nerves with his inner energy." Hira handed her apartment key to Nash. "I may have to go back to the Lewis estate soon. You can stay at my apartment." Nash's eyes lit up. "I even get to save money on accommodation." Hira looked up at Nash and said, "I'm warning you. Don't bring any women into my house. If I catch you, I won't talk to you." Nash laughed. "I'm not a flirt." At this time, several BMW cars were approaching them from the distance. Seeing this, Hira hurriedly said, "My grandfather is here. You should go quickly." Nash glanced at them before turning around to walk away. After he walked about 10 meters away, Helena rolled down the car window and looked at Nash. The smile she wore on her face that was caked in makeup conveyed her schadenfreude. Nash's eyes were slightly cold. Helena shuddered and hurriedly stepped on the accelerator and drove away. Nash arrived outside Hira's apartment, only to see a black Mercedes-Benz driving over slowly. The black Mercedes-Benz stopped at the entrance of the neighborhood, and an old man in traditional garb with his head turned away from him got out of the car. "Grand Master." Brian walked over with a smile on his face. An old man sporting a full head of hair calling Nash Grand Master made him a little uncomfortable. "You can just call me by my name," he said with a smile. Brian raised a brow. "How can I do that? You're my Grand Master's junior, which makes you my Grand Master as well. Wouldn't it be a breach of etiquette if I call you by your name?" Not only him, but if his own master were here, he would still have to address Nash as master. This was the conduct practice within the path of holistic medicine. Nash smiled. "What do you need from me? You've not eaten yet, have you, Grand Master? Shall we look for a hotel and get a few drinks?" Brian looked at Nash nervously, afraid that he would refuse him. Chapter 31. There's no need to go to a hotel. Let's just find a restaurant nearby. Nash was reluctant to go too far. If they went too far, he would have to walk later as he wanted to save money. He had just walked here from Baroque's headquarters earlier. Brian exclaimed with delight. "Great. There's a nice food stall nearby. I used to go there often with some old friends. Let's eat there." In no time at all, Brian brought Nash to a food stall by the roadside. The restaurant owner was very welcoming and said, "Hey there, Dr. Tanner. What brings you here today?" Brian laughed and said, "I've been craving your food. Bring us your signature dishes." "Sure thing." The restaurant owner responded and promptly instructed the kitchen to prioritize Brian's order. Then, He even brought out his own well-aged fine spirit as a complimentary gift to Brian. Countless people lined up to invite Miracle Dr. Tanner for a meal but never got the chance. Brian personally poured a glass of alcohol for Nash and himself. He lifted the glass with both hands and said excitedly, "Grandmaster, our last meeting was rather hasty. So let's take this as our first meeting instead. I'd like to give you a toast." Nash smiled and, without making a fuss, lifted his glass and downed the contents in one gulp. Brian let out a sigh and said, "This is good alcohol. This restaurant owner is really hospitable." Nash set down his glass and said, "Just tell me what's on your mind. As the sole successor of my Marshall brothers' lineage, I'll do whatever I can to help you if you've run into trouble. In that case, I won't beat about the bush. The wife of Walter Watson, the richest man in Johnford, has a strange illness. Her body functions perfectly, and there's no sign of brain death, but she's been in a coma for 3 years now." Brian discreetly observed Nash's facial expression and saw that he remained calm, so he continued, "Walter's charity work is primarily focused on traditional medicine. If we can cure his wife, the medical community in Johnford can receive more charitable donations." Nash picked up a peanut with his hand and chewed on it. Then he poured himself another glass of alcohol and asked, "How much is the consultation fee?" 10 million. Brian immediately spoke up. 10 million. That was enough for him to give over 400 consultations. Even his master's consultation fee was only around 150 grand. Plus, he would only receive the fee after successfully treating the patient. After pondering for a moment, Nash spoke. "Isn't 10 million too little for the wealthy Watson family?" He did not like money, but here as Baroque needed it. Brian chuckled and said, "Grandmaster, you can set the price, and I'll negotiate further with Walter." Since the consultation fee was mentioned, there had not been a change in the Grandmaster's expression. There was even a hint of disdain in his eyes. It was clear that the Grandmaster's fee was far more than 10 million. He was well versed in divine needling, with medical skills that were more than twice as good as his own master's. Thus, it was reasonable for him to charge a high fee. Brian walked aside and made a phone call to Walter. When the price of 15 million was quoted, Walter did not hesitate to agree and said, "As long as you can cure my wife's illness, any amount of money is worth it." 15 million was just a drop in the ocean for the Watson family. Brian returned to the table and had a few more drinks with Nash. Satisfied with the food and drinks, the two of them headed toward the Watsons' residence while slightly intoxicated. The Watson family's estate was magnificent and dazzling, resembling a castle. Kai burned a photo of Nash into ashes and then expressionlessly drove a convertible out of the garage. He was followed closely by 7 cars within the estate. When the security guard opened the gate, Kai immediately set his sight on Nash's slightly flushed face. Chapter 32. Grandmaster. The alcohol is too strong. Brian managed to get his words out amidst the hiccups and burps, but he had to rush to the side after he was done and vomit into a trash bin. There was a sudden brake sound, and Helena parked a white BMW at the entrance of the estate. When she saw Nash, a disgusted expression appeared on her face. It was as if she had seen a fly. However, they were on the Watson family's estate, so she concluded that Nash would not dare to cause trouble. Earlier, after getting slapped by Hira, she had planned to slap her back to preserve some of her dignity. However, it was difficult for her to do it in the presence of her grandpa. Besides, her mother had come up with a better revenge plan. "What luck is this? Bumping into you everywhere." Helena glared at Nash with extreme disdain. The liquor from the restaurant owner's collection was indeed potent. The two of them had only drunk about half a liter of it. Nonetheless, Brian was vomiting uncontrollably on the side, and Nash's stomach was in turmoil. "Sorry, you made me nauseous." Nash patted his chest and gave Helena a disgusted look. Did she think he wanted to see her? Nash vomited as well. He ran to the trash bin and spewed out a mouthful of alcohol. It seemed as if he was genuinely disgusted by Helena. Seeing this, she was trembling with anger. She walked straight to the gate of the estate and said grumpily, "Kai, did you see what he did?" Kai's hands that were gripping the steering wheel turned white, and his bloodshot eyes stared fiercely at Nash. If looks could kill, Nash would have been shredded to pieces by now. In the passenger seat, A blonde-haired person in tight clothes was using a switchblade to trim his nails. Sensing his boss' anger, he pushed his long hair away from his right eye and smirked, saying, "Should I take care of him?" Kai squinted his eyes and sneered. "He laid his hands on my man, but before I could settle scores with him, he came looking for me instead." Kai suddenly stepped on the accelerator. The red sports car shot forward like lightning, rushing toward Nash at an incredible speed. With his father at home, he did not dare to kill Nash right in front of their own doorstep, but he could still cause a car accident. Nash had a cultivation level of at least the 9th division of inner energy, so he would not be easily killed by a collision. However, if he could send Nash flying, the man would be severely disabled even if he did not die. In the blink of an eye, a distance of over 50 meters was covered. Kai's eyes carried a sense of madness as he nearly pressed the accelerator to the max. Nash realized what was happening and narrowed his eyes as he kicked fiercely. Unnoticed by anyone, an imperceptible ripple spread from the leg he kicked with. The experts with different colored hair revealed disdainful expressions on their faces. Withstanding the full-speed impact of a sports car with one's own body was akin to an egg hitting a rock. Even a martial arts grandmaster would only end up severely injured or disabled. Helena clenched her fists, excitedly exclaiming, "Hit him! Hit him!" Nash had martial arts skills, so she did not dare to act recklessly, but her boyfriend was gutsy. Plus, if Kai killed Nash, the Watson family had 100 ways to cover up this accident. A deafening explosion resonated throughout the entire estate. The sports car tumbled in the air, and Kai fell heavily to the ground, covered in blood. The front of the car was crushed, and engine parts were scattered all over the place. The sports car dropped to the ground, sliding several meters before coming to a stop. The multi-million-dollar supercar had turned into a heap of scrap metal. Kai! Chapter 33. The 8 Stage 9 experts with different hair colors immediately ran over. Seeing that Kai was covered in blood, their eyes turned bloodshot as a surge of killing intent emanated from them. Fortunately, Kai only suffered some superficial injuries. With the support of the others, he stood up and spat out a mouthful of blood before roaring, "Kill him for me!" Instantly, the 8 Stage 9 experts drew their switchblades and rushed toward Nash. Concerned about being disrespectful in the Watsons' residence, Brian used acupoint stimulation to keep himself alert. Just as he regained his senses, he saw the 8 figures charging toward the Grandmaster like hungry tigers, their bodies exuding a strong murderous aura. It seemed like their target was the Grandmaster. "Oh my God! Grandmaster, run!" Brian shouted loudly. Nash clenched his fists, his killing intent fully revealed. He was not one to seek trouble, but he was not afraid of it either. Brian crawled and knelt his way to Nash's side while shouting, "Stop!" The switchblade in the hands of the blonde-haired man, known as Canary, was about to pierce straight into Brian's heart. His expression showed no hesitation, and his eyes were filled with malice. Nash grabbed Brian's shoulder and forcefully pulled him back. Then he kicked Canary's wrist. The switchblade slipped from his hand, and Canary's face changed slightly. Just as he was about to catch it, he took a palm strike to the chest. The tremendous force sent Canary to retreat extremely quickly. He raised his head abruptly, but his vision blurred as the sharp blade came within a millimeter of his eyeball. Canary swallowed his saliva. He was feeling the air of death at that moment. Nash retrieved his blade and delivered an elbow strike that sent Canary flying 10 meters away. The other remaining experts halted in their tracks. Canary's strength was the strongest among them, yet he had no resistance against the young man before them. This indicated that Nash's strength was at the level of a grandmaster. He was capable of contending with 10 Stage 9 experts. Nash dropped the switchblade in his hand and looked at Brian, saying, "I won't be taking this business deal anymore. You should have the Watsons hire someone else." The reason he agreed to treat Mrs. Watson was because Brian was his Marshall Brothers' grand disciple. Thomas' medical skills came from their master, and Brian's medical skills came from Thomas. In a way, both he and Brian were from the same lineage, with only a difference in seniority. He had the intention to help Mrs. Watson, yet he almost ended up being killed by a Watson family member. If it were not for the 3 years of seclusion in the mountains, which allowed his temperament to become stable, Canary would have already died just now. As for Kai, who drove the car to crash into Nash, he would not have been able to escape death either. Brian's face was pale as paper, and it was only when Nash spoke to him that he regained his senses. He nodded with a bitter expression and said, "I understand, Grandmaster." He did not know what grudge there was between the Watsons' oldest son and the Grandmaster. They had just bumped into one another before they immediately started fighting, nearly causing a fatality. With such behavior from the Watsons, his Grandmaster naturally would not want to treat Mrs. Watson. Brian did not dare to persuade his Grandmaster either. Nonetheless, he could not offend the Watsons. All he could do was relay the Grandmaster's words to Walter. Nash turned around and left without looking back. Just as he left, Walter hurriedly walked out with a group of people. Upon seeing the scrapped car and his grandson covered in blood, Walter only furrowed his brows slightly before walking straight to Brian. He politely placed his hand on his heart and said, "Dr. Tanner." Brian returned the gesture and replied, "Mr. Watson." Walter glanced around and smiled faintly, asking, "Where's your Grandmaster?" Brian remained calm and replied, "My Grandmaster has left. He asked me to convey a message to you. He won't take this business deal anymore. The Watsons should find someone else." With the situation as it was, he could only be honest. Walter looked puzzled and said, "He was already here. Why did he leave?" Brian glanced at Kai and calmly said, "That's a question you should ask your grandson." Chapter 34. Walter took a deep breath and walked directly to the security booth. The two security guards in neatly pressed uniforms immediately saluted him. "Retrieve the surveillance footage from earlier and show it to me," Walter said while suppressing his anger. He had no interest in asking about what had just happened. He needed to see things with his own eyes to believe them. The security guards quickly retrieved the surveillance footage from earlier. As Walter watched the footage and saw Nash in the frame, his eyes widened in astonishment. Could this young man be Miracle Dr. Tanner's Grandmaster? When he witnessed Nash kick Kai's car away with one foot, his pupils contracted even further. He turned his head to the person covered in a black hoodie standing behind him. "Iron kick? What's the level of this person's strength?" The man slowly raised his head, revealing a face covered in stubble and burned scars. One of the security guards tactfully replayed the footage. Iron kick rasped, "He's a Grandmaster above stage 5. Upon hearing this, Walter became even more certain that this person was Brian's Grandmaster. Only someone with such talent could be on equal footing with the renowned cleric Thomas King. After watching the surveillance footage, Walter hurriedly approached Kai and asked in a deep voice, "Why did you try to hit him with your car?" Kai glanced casually at Walter, then took Helena's hand and walked toward the garage. "You come back here," Walter exclaimed in anger, but Kai did not stop in his tracks. Soon, Kai drove another sports car out and left the estate with his subordinates. Walter clenched his fists in anger. "That insolent brat! He doesn't even respect me now." An elderly man in a tunic shirt behind him chuckled and said, "Mr. Kai is going through a rebellious phase, Mr. Watson. Please calm down." Walter sighed helplessly. "It's all my fault for spoiling him." Kai's mother came from a humble background, and he strongly opposed their marriage for the sake of the family's interests. That woman faced all sorts of pressure after marrying into the Watsons. After giving birth to Kai, she hung herself. Since then, Kai's father became depressed and drank heavily every day. Eventually, due to excessive drinking, he caused a series of car accidents. In order to atone for his sins, Walter concealed the truth about everything from Kai and even spoiled him in every possible way. However, secrets could not be kept forever, and the Watsons had many prying eyes. The family's trusted old butler inadvertently revealed the truth while intoxicated at a banquet. From that day on, Kai held deep resentment in his heart. Thinking about all this, Walter's anger subsided significantly. He turned to Iron Kick and said, "Iron Kick, from today onward, you'll follow Kai around. I don't want to see him get hurt anymore." Iron Kick replied in a low voice, "Mr. Kai has a mischievous nature. It'll cost you more to have me follow him." Walter nodded and said, "I'll give you 30 million annually, but you must ensure that Kai doesn't suffer any harm. It'll be over my dead body." Iron Kick rasped. Walter waved his hand dismissively. "Go on then." He did not know how to dispel Kai's hatred toward him. All he could do was protect Kai from harm as much as possible. Brian observed everything and sighed inwardly. Walter's excessive indulgence in Kai would only make him more reckless. If this continued, Kai and even the entire Watson family would meet a bitter end. Walter approached Brian and placed his hand on his heart, saying, "Dr. Tanner, Kai has offended your Grand Master, and I deeply apologize for this. Please reintroduce your Grand Master to me. I'll personally visit and apologize with utmost sincerity." Well, Brian hesitated, his face showing reluctance. If it were not for the fact that the Grand Master excelled in both medicine and martial arts and possessed formidable strength, they might have met their end today. From his brief interaction with the Grand Master, Brian could tell that he was not someone to be trifled with. Walter's personal visit and apology might not necessarily lead to a peaceful resolution with the Grand Master. Chapter 35. Walter turned his head to look at a short-haired woman in a suit, leather shoes, and glasses behind him. "Write me a check for 30 million. The female secretary took out a checkbook and pen from the briefcase. She quickly wrote the figure, tore the check off, and handed it to Walter. "I heard that you recently led a group of people to conduct free clinics in impoverished mountainous areas, Dr. Tanner." Walter handed the check to Brian with a smile. "The Watsons are charitable and willing to do our part for the free clinic project." The cost of the free clinic project was very low, and the $30 million was a sort of bribe for Brian. Brian was a well-known miracle doctor, and if Walter was too direct, he would definitely not accept this check. Brian would definitely not refuse if it were for such a high-sounding reason. Brian saw through Walter's intention almost immediately. After a moment of hesitation, he still took the check. "On behalf of the patients in the mountainous areas, I thank you, Mr. Watson. I'll talk to my Grand Master again, but I must reiterate that I hope you won't have too high expectations." Nash returned to Hira's pad. Sitting on the sofa, he played the copied video recording from the Lewis family's estate on his phone. He wanted to find out who wanted to harm Herman. At first, he thought it was Helena's family. However, Nash had a gut feeling that Hubert did not seem like the mastermind. He concluded that there was another person behind it from Hubert's family. If he were to ask Hubert directly, he probably would not be able to find the person behind the scenes, so he had to find out for himself. After watching nearly half a month's worth of surveillance footage from the Lewis family's estate, he did not find any suspicious individuals. As Hannah had to send her nephew to school every day, she would go in and out every morning and evening. She seemed relaxed at her job and would often talk and laugh with Maria. On the 23rd, which was also 3 days before the old man's incident happened, Kane had called out to Hannah. From the surveillance footage outside, Kane was seen taking Hannah to the garden, where he reprimanded her. It seemed like it was because some greenery in the garden had withered and died due to poor care. In the next few days, Hannah was absent-minded in doing anything, and she no longer had her usual smile on her face. She even knocked over a glass of water several times when serving tea to Herman. At this time, the doorbell rang. Nash stepped on the soft carpet and walked to the door. He glanced through the peephole. Just outside was a man wearing a sun hat. He was wearing a blue delivery uniform and was carrying a packaged meal in his hand. Nash narrowed his eyes and asked, "Who is it?" "Food delivery. I didn't order anything. Someone ordered it for you." "Who ordered it for me?" "You have to ask the restaurant about this." The delivery man then urged impatiently, "Hurry up. I still have another order to deliver." Nash opened the door, and suddenly, the deliveryman slipped a sharp knife out of his sleeve and swiftly stabbed toward Nash. Nash grabbed the deliveryman's wrist, stepped on his foot, and then pulled back to bring him down to the ground. As the deliveryman tried to get up, Nash pressed a foot on his back and coldly questioned, "Who are you?" It was evident that this person came to assassinate Hira. Nash did not let the guy place the takeaway food on the ground. He only wanted to find out more from him. The deliveryman did not utter a word and just kept struggling to stand up. Nash asked again, "I'll give you one more chance. Either talk or die. You people killed my son, and I'm going to kill you all." The deliveryman growled with a suppressed voice. Nash frowned. "Who's your son? Did you just ask who my son is? Do you think you can buy my son's life with 200 grand? Chapter 36. The deliveryman's voice was hoarse. Nash had guessed who this person was. He loosened his foot and calmly said, "You're Hannah's brother-in-law, right?" Freed from the constraint, the deliveryman immediately picked up the sharp knife from the floor and swung it toward Nash's throat with a backhand. Nash extended 2 fingers and clamped the blade, applying slight force to break it into two. Blinded by hatred, the deliveryman's mind was clouded. He had no time to consider these details. All he knew was that he wanted to kill the people in this house to avenge his son. Veins were bulging on his forehead as he fiercely grabbed Nash's neck. "I'm going to kill all of you Lewises." Nash grabbed both of the deliveryman's wrists and held them apart while saying, "I'm not even a Lewis. Will you please calm down?" Hearing this, the deliveryman's grip weakened, and the ferocity on his face gradually faded. Who are you?" Nash closed the door and calmly replied, "My name is Nash Calcraft." The delivery person released his hands and turned around to explore the house. Finding that Hira was not there, he approached Nash and asked, "Who are you? And why are you in Hira Lewis' place?" "I'm Hira's fiancé," Nash answered. The deliveryman's face turned cold, and he clenched his fist, ready to attack again. Nash, no longer indulging him, directly punched him and sent him sprawling to the ground. "With this level of ability, do you really think you can avenge your son? The Lewises have bodyguards around them, and any one of them can knock you down and make you lose all your teeth." Even without his protection, Hira could simply end Scotty's vacation early. And even without Scotty, she could hire a few capable bodyguards from a security company. The man before Nash was in his 30s and extremely weak. Any slightly stronger man could easily defeat him, let alone professionally trained bodyguards. Hearing Nash's mockery, the deliveryman pounded the ground and cried in pain. "I'm useless. I'm so useless. I can't even avenge my son." "Find solace in your grief. That car accident had nothing to do with Hira," Nash said, his tone softening slightly. The deliveryman looked up at Nash, tears flowing as he asked, "Do you know who killed my son?" "I have no idea," Nash replied very simply. The deliveryman let out a miserable smile. "If only I had known, I wouldn't have taken that money. It was the price for my son's life." Hearing this, Nash furrowed his brows. "What money? Who gave you money?" The deliveryman said, "People from the Lewis family. They gave me a large sum of money and said they could get my son into the best school in Johnford, but on the condition that my sister-in-law helped them with something." Nash squinted his eyes and asked, "What did the person who approached you look like?" The delivery person shook his head. "He was wearing a mask, so I couldn't see his face clearly, but I heard the voice of an old man." "Any other distinctive features?" Nash hurriedly asked. "I think he had a mole at the corner of his eye." "Kane Lewis?" The image of Kane's face as he mocked and taunted him was etched in Nash's mind. Kane had a small mole at the corner of his eye. It was difficult to notice because its color matched his skin tone, but the deliveryman must have wanted to remember the person who helped him, so he took a closer look. Kane had given money to Hannah's brother-in-law's family. Then, he persuaded them to convince Hannah to do something for him. Later, he used the excuse of withered plants in the garden to reprimand Hannah. On the way to the garden, Herman gave Hannah a vial of medicine and a syringe, instructing her to inject the medicine into the old man. Having served the Lewises for over 20 years, Hannah did not dare to act. However, her brother-in-law's family had already accepted the bribe, and she was afraid that if she did not do as Kane said, her brother-in-law's family would be implicated. This explained why Hannah was gloomy and absent-minded in the next few days that followed. Chapter 37. Hannah eventually injected the medicine into Herman, and Kane, thinking that the matter would be revealed, hired a hitman to silence her. Nash pieced together the whole story, but to confirm it, he needed to have a conversation with Kane. "What's your name?" Nash helped the deliveryman up from the ground. "Hugo Zabinski," the deliveryman replied in a low voice. "There's indeed someone behind the deaths of your son and sister-in-law. I'll investigate and ensure that the mastermind is brought to justice." "You shouldn't involve yourself in this matter anymore," Nash assured confidently. "You're all in this together. I won't believe your nonsense." Hugo was filled with a deep hatred for the Lewises, and Nash was Hira's fiancé, so naturally, he would not trust him. "If you insist on meddling, not only will you fail to get revenge, but you'll also bring death upon yourself and your wife." Nash squinted his eyes as he spoke. Hugo immediately became more subdued. The man made a valid point. He was just an ordinary delivery man. While the Lewises were a powerhouse he could never afford to offend. They had plenty of money and could easily eliminate him. It would not matter much if he died. But what about his wife and elderly parents at home? After a moment of silence, Hugo looked at Nash and asked, "What should I do then?" Nash replied, "First, take your wife and hide for a while." In fact, there was still a lingering doubt in his mind. Was Kane trying to kill his own brother solely to help Hubert and his family, or was there another reason? If it was merely to assist Hubert in acquiring the Lewis's assets, it would be somewhat manageable. However, if there was another motive, the entire Lewis household would likely face utter disaster. Kneeling before Nash, Hugo pleaded, "Mr. Calcraft, you must ensure that the culprit is sent to prison, or my son and sister-in-law will never rest in peace." Nash nodded and said, "I'll do my best." After seeing Hugo off, it was already dark outside. Nash took out his bag from the corner next to the sofa. Inside was a set of black tactical gear, a white smiling face mask, and a blood-red diamond-shaped dagger. These were his standard equipment for assassination missions. On the dark web's assassin leaderboard, he was known as the Smiling Grim Reaper. Nonetheless, this time, Nash was not out to kill. Soon, it was midnight. Nash stood in front of the mirror and looked at the smiling face mask reflected in it, feeling somewhat surreal. It had been 4 years since he last wore this outfit. The smartphone on the bed vibrated and rang. It was a video call from Hera. Nash took off the mask and got into bed. He only showed his head and pretended to be sleepy as he answered the call. Hera was sitting on her bed in a pink pajama set, feeling a bit embarrassed. She said, "Did I wake you up, Nash?" Nash yawned and said, "It's good that you're self-aware. Why aren't you asleep?" Hera pursed her lips and said, "I can't sleep." Noticing a hint of worry on Hera's face, Nash smiled and asked, "Is something on your mind?" "Well, I hope you won't get angry when I tell you." "Go ahead." "My grandfather wants me to marry Hunter Hill, and the Hills have decided to come and propose on my birthday." Oh, is that your only reaction?" Hera pouted. "It's just a proposal, not a wedding." Nash laughed. "Come on. You're my fiancé now. Don't you feel even a hint of jealousy?" Hera felt a bit disappointed in her heart. "I understand. You're only completing the task your master assigned to you. You won't actually develop feelings for me, right?" Chapter 38. Love is supposed to be a mutual pursuit, right? Nash said with a smile. Hera was a bit stunned. What does a mutual pursuit mean? He scratched his head. "I've never been in a relationship, so I can't really say. I guess it means you like me and I like you too." She chuckled. "You do give me a different feeling. Even though we just met, having you by my side makes me feel secure." "Maybe that's what liking someone feels like." Nash smirked. "That's good. Once the old man recovers his memory, we'll just go and get married." "And what about you? How do you feel about me?" A charming expression appeared on Hera's pretty face. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I want to protect you." Though it was just 5 words, Hera found them as sweet as honey. Images of Nash saving her and Scotty involuntarily flashed through her mind. Perhaps it was from that moment that she had a sense of absolute security when she was with him. She smiled sweetly. "It's getting late. You should rest early. I'm going to sleep too." "Good night." Nash said good night and hung up the phone. He casually tossed his phone on the pillow, put on the mask, and jumped out of the window. Herman's eldest brother, Kane, and his 2 cousins each had their own villas in the Lewis family's estate. Inside his study, Kane yawned and put the books on the table back on the shelf. Then, he went to his bedroom to sleep. Upon entering the bedroom, he turned on the lights and closed the door behind him. He walked toward the bed. Just as he reached the bedside, he noticed a masked figure standing by the window. Kane was startled and turned around to run outside. However, just as he reached out to open the door, he heard a swoosh from behind. He turned around, only to see a red dagger stuck in the door next to his ear. Kane's legs went weak with fright, and he trembled as he asked, "Who are you exactly?" This person could bypass the Lewis's security system and enter his room, so he was clearly not an ordinary person. Kane did not think he had offended anyone, so why would such a skilled individual come for him? Could it be someone hired by Hugo Zabinski? "Why did you harm Herman?" the masked person asked with a sinister tone. "What do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying." Kane averted his gaze, unable to meet the masked person's eyes directly. You had the nanny inject Herman with a biochemical agent. Where did that agent come from? Nash continued to ask, suppressing his voice. What agent? I really don't understand what you're saying. Kane's gaze kept shifting. Nash took out a mini syringe from his pocket and slowly approached Kane, sneering. Inside this syringe is cancer cells and a catalyst. Just one night is enough to turn you from a normal person into someone with late-stage cancer. Kane trembled when he heard this. You, stay away. He did not dare to further question the masked person's words. After all, he had witnessed the effects of such an agent firsthand. Herman had been saved by that kid Nash, but he would not be so lucky. You're one of them. You won't even let me go. At this moment, he could only connect the masked person with the one who gave him the agent. Chapter 39. Upon hearing Kane's words, Nash could not help but sigh inwardly. His worst fear had come true. The people Kane mentioned should be the Kleins. If you don't want to die, answer my question. Nash had already walked up to Kane. The needle of the syringe in his hand emitted a chilling gleam. Kane's lips trembled, and he stared at Nash, asking, You're not one of them? It was only now that he realized that if Nash were one of them, he would not be asking why he harmed Herman. Who's this that you're referring to? Nash asked calmly. Kane hesitated, still not answering Nash's question. Nash snorted coldly and directly stuck the syringe into Kane's chest, slowly placing his thumb on the pushing rod. Don't. I'll talk. Kane's pupils contracted intensely as he hurriedly exclaimed. Nash withdrew the syringe, staring at the men in front of him with a cold gaze. Kane took a deep breath and slowly said, I don't know who they are either. They gave me 200 million and asked me to find a way to get rid of Herman. He cautiously glanced at the masked person's eyes, and seeing his icy expression, he continued, I initially refused, but they threatened the safety of my family. I told them that Herman was already terminally ill, and it wouldn't be too long now, but they gave me a potion to inject into Herman's body. This way, it wouldn't be traced back to anyone. Nash asked indifferently, Then why is Herman all better now? By asking this question, he wanted to absolve himself of suspicion as Nash. Kane forced a bitter smile and replied, There's a villager who came down from Teely Mountain and miraculously saved Herman from the brink of death. Nash continued to inquire, Was the death of the nanny also orchestrated by you? Kane immediately shook his head. I had nothing to do with that. It must have been their doing. Nash raised the syringe in his hand, pushing out a drop of transparent liquid. He continued asking, Does Hubert's family also know about this? Kane shuddered and quickly nodded. Yes, they also know about it. They even said that if I could help them acquire the Lewis's assets, they'd give me half. Just as Kane was done speaking, a deafening gunshot sounded from outside. Almost simultaneously, Nash forcefully pushed Kane aside, while a 3-centimeter bullet grazed past Nash's temple. The bullet did not penetrate the wall. Instead, the concrete wall was blasted with a huge hole. Nash swiftly turned around and took a step toward the window, his gaze fixed on a skyscraper located a kilometer away. There was another gunshot. Nash extended two fingers and caught the bullet. Near the window of a certain floor on the skyscraper, a middle-aged man dressed in a security uniform looked shocked. He skillfully disassembled the sniper rifle into pieces and swiftly fled the scene. An hour later, a large number of patrol cars arrived at the Lewis family's estate. The members of the Lewis family were all sitting in the living room of Herman's villa, their faces filled with fear. They were wide awake. Harrison asked with concern, Uncle, have you offended someone recently? Kane shook his head repeatedly. I'm just an old man. I've long ceased to meddle in business matters. How could I have offended anyone? He dared not reveal the truth behind the incident. He did not want the entire Lewis family to know that he had planned to kill his own younger brother for money. Otherwise, he and his family would bear a terrible reputation. I bet it's all because of that jinx, Nash, Rooney muttered with a scornful expression. Lauren looked at Rooney coldly and said, Why are you bringing Nash into this? Nash has already been chased out from the Lewis family's estate. What else do you want? Before Nash came, the Lewises were fine, right? But since this jinx arrived, the old man fell critically ill. And then, shut it! Chapter 40. Hubert reprimanded Rooney with a flushed face and a raised voice. Rooney trembled in fear, realizing that she had almost slipped her tongue. She quickly closed her mouth obediently. Helena also glared disapprovingly at her own mother. Everything else about her mother was good, but she lacked a filter when she spoke. They had managed to keep the matter of her grandfather's critical condition hidden, and now it was brought up again. If Grandpa regained his memory, would their family be able to sit here safe and sound? Hubert cautiously looked at Herman and breathed a sigh of relief when he saw his father pinching his nose in distress. Lauren smiled faintly and said, "Dad, you heard everything, right? You were indeed critically ill and admitted to Johnford Hospital. Mr. Dean even invited Miracle Dr. Tanner, but they couldn't cure you. It was Nash who cured you." Hubert angrily interjected, "Lauren, will you stop spreading nonsense here?" Harrison said coldly, "Who's the one spreading nonsense about the truth?" "That's enough," Herman roared. Immediately, both families fell silent. Herman looked coldly at his two sons and said, "Now is not the time to discuss whether or not I was sick." The patriarch's imposing presence instantly silenced everyone. Herman said to Jupiter, "Chief Holt, I'll have to trouble you to investigate the culprit thoroughly tonight. Tomorrow, I'll enhance the security system of the Lewis family's estate." Jupiter nodded. "Rest assured, Mr. Lewis, we'll investigate the true culprit of this incident overnight." Herman stood up and looked at Hubert's and Harrison's families. "You all have work tomorrow. Go and get some rest." Nash returned to the ground floor, avoiding the cameras and crawling along the wall like a gecko to enter the apartment unit. After freshening up, he slipped into the bed where Hira had once slept. The soft and fuzzy thin blanket felt very comfortable as it covered him. He took out his smartphone from under the pillow and saw a message from Hira. "There was a shooting incident at home. It was so terrifying. It would have been great if you were by my side. Did you give Mr. Lewis the medicine?" Nash quickly replied to the message. Just 3 seconds after sending it, Hira responded, "I bought the medicine, and my mom is figuring out how to communicate with Maria. Why are you up so late?" "I had a nightmare." "Are you scared? Come here. I'll give you a hug." Completely forgetting her previous panic, Hira's face was filled with a smile. "What is there for a grown man like me to be afraid of? Go to sleep quickly." "Heh, what a typical man. I'm going to sleep now. Good night." Hira huffily put down her phone and went to sleep. Herman sat on the bed. He had searched through his phone contacts for a while but could not find Mr. Dean's number. Harrison said Mr. Dean was his old comrade. If they were truly comrades, he would have saved his number, right? He then found Mr. Zoel's number. After contemplating for a while, he decided to make the call. "Mr. Lewis, Mr. Zoel, was I terminally ill with cancer before?" "No," Adam immediately replied. Herman's eyes flickered slightly, and he said calmly, "Please help me get the phone number of Mr. Dean from Johnford Hospital." In an ordinary apartment room, Adam suddenly sat up in bed. "Okay, Mr. Lewis, please wait a moment." He picked up his tablet from the bedside table. Suddenly, he paused and found Helena's profile on WhatsApp. "Miss Lewis, Mr. Herman asked me to get Mr. Dean's phone number for him. Let him know. We've already communicated with the hospital about it.